Now, Colin, like he was peeping a little bit because much of what he has talked about really relates to some of what I want us to discuss this evening. I can't say that I'll be as long as he was, but I hope I'll be as impactful. But first, I always have to deal with home at us. I always have to deal with St. Michael South Central and the compact that I have reached officially since 2018, but in October 2016, I became the Barbados Labour Party candidate for St. Michael South Central. That is the anniversary that I hold a little bit dear to my heart, to be honest. It was October 2016, I believe. It was the beginning of October. And then a year and a half later, was able to become the Member of Parliament, and again in 2022. Now, I know it might come as a bit of a cliche, people say all the time, but it has really been the honor of my life to serve this constituency of St. Michael South Central. And every MP has to say that. Every MP, Colin, you have to say that about St. Peter. But I know that you feel that. And I feel that as somebody who grew up in St. Michael, who came up in Carrington's Church up the road, went to Belmont Primary. We right here we were talking about going to school in town. Who went to school in town? But it really is, I tell people all the time that I've done two things in my life that I feel everybody should do if they have the chance. The first job I had was as a cashier at a supermarket. Came to understand how people consume, why they consume, what are the choices they make when they have to choose one thing over the other. You know, the old ladies that can no longer get out that you have to go and shop for. You know, that level of service and understanding in a community. And political service. And political service doesn't always have to look like being the MP, but it can look in many cases like some of the people sitting here today. Members of the executive who are in the audience, the president who's sitting here at the table, Samantha, the constituency assistant, who is a month strong going now with us and doing a great job. It looks like different things. But I say all of that because I feel it is important for people to understand and believe that I am here to stay. And why am I saying that? When I announced a few weeks ago that I had resigned from the cabinet, there was a flurry of concern. Samantha will tell you that people came knocking on the door of the office. People called and people said, well, what does that mean for South Central? I think it is because, and we have to confront the fact that still we have not completed the job of making sure that people understand clearly and internalize what our political system looks like and how does it work. So when an election is held and there's a majority of MPs who are successful for a particular party, and that party then forms the government, what will happen, and that's on the basis of an election, that's on the basis of people voting, what will happen soon thereafter? Sometimes it happens, Colin, the same day, sometimes you have to wait a week or two to get a call from a prime minister to invite you to serve in her or his cabinet. That is at the appointment of the prime minister. Has nothing to do with your election by the people of the constituency as member of parliament. They're two different things. They are in fact two separate jobs. And so the decision that I took, the decision that I felt I had to take at the time, because as I said in the statement, I think that is important. And some of our stalwarts taught me this long ago, including people like Billy Miller and others whose names you called this evening, Colin, that in cases where there is enough of a misalignment, then a minister has a duty, and I take that seriously, has a duty to be able to step back to say, the government wants to continue in this way, if a Labour Party government wants to continue in this way, as a dutiful member of the Labour Party, I step back from the cabinet to allow the government to proceed. I continue passionately, as hopefully you saw in your last estimates, to represent St. Michael South Central as your member of Parliament. And I felt I had to say that in this forum because I felt that there was a little bit of confusion about what a resignation from cabinet means. A resignation from cabinet is just that. You say to the person who appointed you, thank you for the opportunity, I'm no longer able to continue. In fact, as soon as I resigned from cabinet, this is where I came. To be able to continue to increase, to improve the service to the people of this constituency. So my first job this evening is to clarify that, because there are people in this room that will tell you that they were getting some concern. I was in this office for my regular Wednesday clinic when people started showing up and saying, what does this mean? What we have to do? What we have to do? And I said, nothing. You don't do anything. I'm here with you. We rally on into and hopefully past the next few elections. And in that regard, I also wanted to be able to say briefly a little bit about what we've been working on in the constituency since the beginning of the year. Now, most of you know that as constituency branches, as members of Parliament, we continue to support households in need. It is something that we find that from time to time we have to, there are fluctuations, I would say. And one of the things being a member of Parliament is able to show you is exactly how people are responding to or benefiting from the policies of government. That is one of the reasons I think it is important for people who are responsible for policy making to serve at the constituency level. Colin Jordan knows what I'm talking about. It is important for people who will have to sit in a room and decide policy for people to similarly interact with those people, to understand how they live, how they make their decisions, what they need to thrive, and so on. So at the end of last year and into the new year, we continued much of the kind of support that we do to households, to individuals, to families, to allow them to be able to meet their basic needs. Many of you were involved in helping us execute the 2 children's parties that we had on this occasion. One here at Gully Hill and the other in Britain's Hill, because, well, this is one St. Michael and one constituency. Sometimes we have to spread the love a little bit around, because people don't always move around in the ways that you expect them to move. And the people from Britain's Hill who are sitting there looking at me would know that. But we carried the love. We had it in Carrington Village, moved up to Britain's Hill, and those were some of the activities that we were able to do. Following our refurbishment of the Gully Hill Pavilion, what we were also able to do was to reintroduce some programs there. One of the ones that perhaps has been having the most impact is the boxing program that we're doing in the basement. We have a boxing gym there. We have still walking that goes on there. And one of the points that we have been trying to make to the ministry responsible for youth, sport, and community empowerment is that we have to continue to invest in programs for young people in communities and continue to invest in the maintenance of these facilities. We expect Mr. President, to return next month in May to the midweek mingle that we have, which sees the crowd as about 20 multiples of this. Once the karaoke of this crowd here this evening, once the karaoke is set up, somehow people are more drawn to karaoke than to the sound of my own voice. But we expect Yoda to return to those next month. And why? Look, there's this notion that entertainment is distraction. I can't say that I subscribe to that. There is, Colin spoke earlier about something that's very important, which is a sense of community cohesion, which is a place that people can come and relate to each other. And if I can look my neighbor in the eye, if I can look people from my community in the eye and see them and feel them and understand them, then I am more likely to live as a good neighbor. And those are the things that we want to encourage in our community. That is one of the reasons that we have these events where people can come here to this office on a Wednesday, once a month, and relate to one another, because we still think that that is important. You may have seen as well that we were able finally to hand over the Weymouth B pastor, the Weymouth Wales team, which I dare say is on track to win Premier League again. I probably shouldn't say that because Britain's Hill is number 2 in the table right now, so I am problems. I have to support both. Either way, I'll be happy. But the fact is that you get out what you put in. And for years, both of those sites, and we have a Martindale's Road site as well, that is quite new, but extremely talented. For years, both of those sites have been doing their very best to continue to produce and to perform. And I think that we have a duty as the communities from which they come to give them that support. And so Wales has not had a home ground in all this time. And we were very happy. We're going to continue to be able to invest in that ground. Once they win the Premier League, I'm probably not supposed to say that. Jamila, hear me. If they win the Premier League, then we hope to be able to have the signs erected to say, home of Weymouth Wales, because we think that that's extremely important. We were able to establish, the government of Barbados, along with the Barbados Football Association, established a youth hub for football at Valerie. And let me tell you, it keeps growing, keeps getting bigger. Every time I see the group, it just seems to be multiplying. It is not just about football, but it's meant to be able to help share some life skills and keep young people engaged, keep maintaining a conversation with our young people, which is critical. You know, I always say that if we keep people talking, they may not tell you what is concerning them in the first or second conversation, but you keep young people talking. Let young people believe that there's a safe space for them to talk without judgment, to express, and they'll keep doing it. So I have to say that we're very pleased to have the leadership of Amanda at the Barbados Football Association and the government of Barbados to be able to get that going. The next event that we will have here is the relaunch of our Ideas Club. The Ideas Club is a youth program that we started years ago that we closed during COVID. We shut down during COVID when it was very hard to bring young people together. It's an after-school program, and it is really for what we call extracurricular learning. So things that young people are not necessarily going to learn about at school, or extra learning that will help them understand what they're learning at school. But the relaunch of the Ideas Club will actually coincide with the launch of our community farming program right there at Gully Hill. With thanks to the Ministry of Agriculture and food and nutrition security, but initiated by a group of young men from the Carrington Village area, what we've started to develop is a community farming program. I know that they have received 3 sheep, that they have done some seedlings, they have started to create the beds, and what that will form is the basis of a program to teach young people about farming, to encourage community farming. We are very fortunate to have, from right here in this community, a couple of young men who are trained in this area, who teach classes in this area, including at Barbados Community College, and came to us and said, look, there are new ways to do farming in small spaces and community spaces so people can eat. I told them, please plant me some soursop, if you don't mind. But that will not just be about the farming program, but also about how do we get young people out. Because, and the reason for the idea was that they're trying to get their work together, doing the terracing and doing the beds. And some of the youngsters who were out there running around said, well, what was this? Show me how to do this. I want to be able to do this. And so we relaunched the Ideas Club on April 26th with that community farming program as its basis. But let me complete to some of the thoughts that I want to share with you after having given that update. And I'm glad Colin talked about production and, in a sense, this whole question of balancing rights and protection with expectations and responsibility. When I say expectations, I mean the expectations that others have of us and the responsibility to produce. Now, he talked a lot about production. I am going to say a few words really about a related idea, which is productivity. Now, I say these things against the backdrop that in about 2018 or 2019, in 2019 I believe it was, I was the then Minister in Economic Affairs and Investment. The government of Barbados took a decision to close the National Productivity Council. One of the reasons that decision was taken was on the basis of a survey that we did at the national level. Folks may remember that survey. I was quite blown away by the response to the survey. We asked the people of Barbados. One of those questions, Colin, was about maintaining the exchange rate, maintaining the strength of the dollar. That was overwhelmingly a yes, do what needs to be done. But some of the other questions we asked at the time were about, well, what are the institutions that you think that are highly desirable, that are, essential and optional? It's kind of nice to have things. So there are things that might be nice to have if you have the bandwidth, if you have the stretch in the dollar to support them. But we heard from Barbadians about what are the most important institutions. And what was that based on? That was based on the value that they could get in the future from those institutions. The National Productivity Council was not one of the institutions that Barbadians felt at the time that they were getting the kind of value that they would want to get. And look, I know that this is becoming more and more a time when people are looking to catch on to things and say, oh, but you said that the National Productivity Council didn't do any work. That's not what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the measurement of productivity requires a certain immediacy in policy making that I don't think a council, isolated on one hand, is able to achieve. And let me tell you what I mean. When we talk about productivity, there are lots of different ways to measure it. The labor minister will know that labor productivity is a huge issue. It is really, what is your GDP? What are you able to produce for the level of investment that is made in labor or in work? Many countries use what you produce as a function of hours worked. Countries use that for labor productivity. But when we're talking about productivity, we're talking about all the inputs, all the things that we take and put into work, put into production. How efficient is it? How much value do we get from it? So for example, if we have computer systems or technology working for us, how much value do we get from that technology in producing what we produce? What is the level of efficiency that we get? If we have, for example, people patching potholes, as an example, and there's one man who's driving, and he drives a truck, that is his only job, and he sits there in the truck while two other guys come out and do another job, and that's their only job, and when they've finished that for 4 seconds, they're also standing by, watching the other two men who have another job. You may have feelings about the level of productivity in that kind of setup. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about those 5 individuals who are there. Is there some other way of organizing that work? So it's not about those people not working. That's not what it's about. Certainly not in economies like ours. But is there a way to reorganize that workflow so that the driver who's sitting in the truck and waiting until hours, until they're finished, might find another task for the time that they're being paid to increase productivity? So when we're talking about productivity, we're talking about labor productivity, we're talking about technology productivity, we're talking about capital productivity. What are we getting back from the money that we're spending on something? What are we getting back from the levels of investment we are making in the education system in this country? What are we getting back? Now, in 2025, in a country like ours, in circumstances where this Barbados Labour Party government has increased levels of investment across the board, increased social investment, and some of it you heard from Colin about this evening, increased investment in infrastructure, increased investment in different categories of work that people can now find, in situations where we may have arguably reached the highest level that we can reach in some cases for certain categories of investment. The next thing we have to turn to maximizing is productivity. And this is not, I consider that as something that is as plain as the nose on my face. I think that our earlier efforts to measure productivity did not have any real relationship with economic policy making. I think that we measured productivity in the past as something that was nice to know. And it sat there, somebody measured it and put it down, and they said, well, we measured productivity. What does that mean? It doesn't make sense measuring something if you don't intend to change it. What are you measuring it for? And so my suggestion is that we continue to measure productivity, and I'm talking about what we call total factor productivity. And Colleen, you might remember this from your undergrad economics. I'm talking about measuring everything that we use in production. Labor is important, but it's not just labor. I saw a judge in her frustration recently talk about the absence of technology in the court system. And I don't think that she expressed it, but I don't think that is a unique position to have. I do not think it is a controversial thing to say, to suggest that the judicial system in Barbados could benefit from the introduction of a greater use of technology. It is, again, as plain as the nose on my face, and anybody who's been through the court system and seen people writing in books, and then have to go and find the book to come back to remember what was the judgment. This is Barbados in 2025. And so we need to start measuring productivity every day as a function of our economic policy making. And what are we going to do to support and improve people's productivity? This is perhaps even more topical today than it has ever been. When the National Productivity Council closed, that was supposed to have led directly to government's renewed focus on competitiveness. That was supposed to have led directly to the setting up of an investment in improved competitiveness for the country and a more direct set of work on improving that competitiveness. And at the time we established a doing business committee, we had a private sector committee, we had a public sector committee, and those bodies were meant to work together to change the level of competitiveness that Barbados is able to exhibit. I will say that I regret that we were not able to have that system work as nimbly and in as focused a way as it was meant to work. I don't believe in government by committee. I believe that the bodies that we set up have to work. So it's not a question of setting up a council or a committee to come and meet and say, well, we have determined and we have observed that this is the case. And then what? So Barbados has developed a system of coming together from different parts of the country and from different interests to get things done. The social partnership is a good example of that. And I will say that the social partnership has an orientation towards work. Similarly, anything that we set up to work on competitiveness has to be able to have that orientation towards doing things, towards making sure that both in the private sector and in the public sector, that the investments that we are making are bringing the returns that we need them to make. We can look and see what are the countries that perform the best, that have the highest levels of productivity in the world. Those countries have a combination of a couple things. One is, Colin, that they support workplace rights and wellness and so on. That tends to be a trend across the board. But also that they are tying certain benefits to those levels of productivity. It is something that we don't like to say or like to contemplate or talk about. But that if there is no difference in the benefits that I see, whether I show up, whether I perform or not, then where is your increased productivity going to come? There are some countries that have an honor system. I saw that Japan's toll systems broke down for 30-something hours the other day, and they flew the gates. They lifted the bars and said to people, just drive through and pay us later. Honor system. And they got paid. Not every culture can at every point in time be able to depend on just the kindness of strangers or the goodness of people's hearts. And even if we could, Japan still measures productivity. It is something that we need to do, but not just to do it in a marginalized way, but to bring it to bear on how we are coming up with economic policy. Now, Colin talked about Business Barbados, and we believe that Business Barbados is driven by levels of competitiveness, but it has to be measured. The Minister of Labor knows how I feel about his ministry having responsibility for measuring labor productivity. And not only that, for putting it out in the public domain as a ticker across a screen, it may seem, it is certainly something that we haven't done before. But if I am thinking all the time about what is my contribution to the success of my country, what is my contribution to the success of my family, of my community, then it is something that has to be in our consciousness. And it has to be that the government is using these measures as a way to determine how it goes forward. And so I am sure that Business Barbados and the Minister of Labour and the Minister of Finance and Economic Affairs are going to consider all these things together in being able to get a handle on what are our levels of productivity and how do we improve those. Interestingly, the tariff system that has just been introduced globally with no warning holds some lessons in that regard for Barbados. And there has been a lot of conversation about what should Barbados do and how do we respond, and there's been a lot of interesting speculation. But let me say a little bit in my last thoughts and words about how I feel it's a lesson for Barbados. The US's focus on imposing tariffs on all the rest of the world is not new. I mean, any student of economic history has seen how this has played out. This was the reason for the establishment of the World Trade Organization, to be able to say, look, you can't just charge people to export things as you would like. This is going to have implications for other economies. And one could argue that some of these measures of the World Trade Organization actually hurt countries like ours. They certainly decimated banana farming in the Windward Islands, for example. But we all had to comply. We still have to comply. And what is interesting to me is, what will these tariffs mean for the very existence of the World Trade Organization? Because if you are a body that is meant to be able to monitor and police compliance on these things, and then that system is completely dashed away, as the Jamaicans say, then what does that mean for how you perform and the restrictions and the requirements that you put on the rest of the world? But let me tell you why I think that this moment has a lesson for us. It is really the US government's, and I'll say the US government so that I don't call individual names. It is really the US government's attempt, or the US's attempt, to return to manufacturing. It is this notion that manufacturing is the supreme economic activity, and that when there's manufacturing in a country, times are good. Those of us in this part of the world know that that's not necessarily the case, because the world's success in manufacturing came at the cost of our dignity and humanity. So we know that that is a fact. But the reason why I say it has lessons for Barbados, and it won't work in the US. It won't work in the US because manufacturing declines when productivity increases in other places. Manufacturing declines when other people, other countries, other groups are able to do what you are doing better than you. And it's not by chance. So the reason that manufacturing declined in the US, and we saw an increase in services, is because other economies figured out how to do it better and more cheaply. When a country diversifies away from manufacturing, it is very difficult to get back there. The economy, the society, the labor market re-engineers itself. And so with all the best will in the world, you'll find that it's very hard to return there without extreme effort and engineering, which is what you're seeing in the US now. But the reason that it holds lessons for us, and I'll leave others to talk about the response in terms of our tradable sectors, but the reason why it holds lessons for us is that we also have to be careful not to be looking to return to sectors that it has been proven that other people do more cheaply and better. Certain sectors decline when productivity of other people improves. So either we are going to purpose to return to a sector like, say, manufacturing and improve productivity, or we are not in anything in that particular sector. And frankly, I think that manufacturing may be one of those depending on what we are choosing to manufacture. There has been a lot of conversation about Barbados becoming a hub in various manufacturing sectors, but we have to ask ourselves some hard questions. That is the reason why, as Minister of Industry, one of the key targets that we had was to be able to develop an industrial policy. We have to ask ourselves some hard questions about what Barbados can produce, what we can do, based on our geographical position, based on our current levels of productivity. What can we reasonably generate? What sectors can we reasonably participate in where we have a certain advantage or where we can bring about high levels of productivity? And so we are seeing now, and I mean, we're watching it play out every day, but it is unlikely that a return to manufacturing for any country that has long diversified away from it is something that it is going to be able to simply engineer. But this is about the lessons for us. This is about the lessons for us. And one of those is all of the economic diversification that people are talking about. And people always want to diversify away from tourism, but they don't know towards what. But all of the diversification that we're talking about will be for naught if we are not able to address productivity in every sector. If we are not able to address, just as we continue to invest in the rights and the protections of workers, just as we continue to focus on the introduction of technology, we still have to understand what is the mix of people, of capital, of technology that is going to give us the best return. What is the level of investment? What is the nature of investment in education that is going to give us the best return? We have now a challenge where we said in the first BERT program, and I know because I was one of the people that helped write it. We said in BERT, the BERT, Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan, we're on the third iteration now, but in the first one, what did we say Barbados was going to do? We were going towards high wage, high skilled labor. How? The way to get to high wage, high skilled labor, first, is probably to be able to distinguish yourself in services that are able to attract certain levels of income, but also to make sure that you are competitive on your levels of productivity. And we know that that is a fact because we see, and you know, as a finance and economic and investment team, we have had to manage it very closely to be able to say we have the risk of flight of an investment or capital to another jurisdiction because people are finding it easier to operate, and we have to stop and say no. We're going to improve our productivity. That's the conversation that we have. So it is impossible to re-engineer this Barbados economy without confronting squarely the issue of productivity, measuring it, monitoring it, keeping it up front in the minds and eyes of all of us. Because while, yes, the state has a responsibility to invest in people and their well-being, we also have a responsibility to be able to bring about this high-skilled, high-wage economy that right now we are not on a path to unless we are able to come together to see the gains in the education transformation that we are working on, to be able to ensure that people have the skills to be able to earn them at the levels of income that we have promised. It is in a small state, it is not an easy task. And the truth is that this government is perhaps faced with this reengineering at a time when it is most difficult. I am confident, and I know the Minister of Labour is confident, that this is the Barbados Labour Party government that can get this work done. We have to set our minds to the task, and we have to realize that we have to change, in many cases, our understanding of certain things. That we have to continue to have our rights and responsibilities focus on what we're doing, approach to what we're doing. I sit on the Joint Standing Committee for Economic Policy in Parliament as a backbencher. But these committees of Parliament are critical. And I introduce it now as I close because I do not think that, I think that this thinking and this work of re-engineering requires all minds, all ideas to contend, all hands on deck. I think that we have had a model and we have perpetuated a model in certain cases that we have to be ready to shift quickly. And I believe that while we focus on the kinds of investment that we have been making, we have to be prepared to continue to put people at the center, but also to make our discussion and understanding of what makes us productive and what makes us perform and what keeps Barbados punching above its weight, as others have said, even though it's not a term that I care for much. What keeps Barbados competitive, what keeps us all living the kinds of lives that we enjoy and that we value, we have to start to confront what is it that we have to do differently and what is it that we have to do urgently. I know that this Barbados Labour Party is at the place of confronting those and is putting our minds squarely to that task as we go forward in a very uncertain future. And I know that all of you will help, and so I'm pleased that you've all come to be a part of this conversation. Thank you. I mean, it may sound like a bit of a cop-out, but the truth is I think that we need improved productivity in every sector, and I'll tell you what I mean. Sometimes we feel that, is an approach I call add technology and stir. Sometimes we feel that if we introduce technology to a process, just because we have a website or we have an electronic form, then that removes the responsibility or the need for the people who work in the area to also perform. And I go immediately to the public sector because I think that is a space that has a lot of potential for increased productivity. Not just, one of the things I have to make clear is this. Economies that are small like ours that already have a lot of our inputs assigned, meaning the people we have low employment right now, which means a lot of the people who are low unemployment right now, which means a lot of the people who are working, who will work are working. So if we have people already assigned to certain roles or categories of work, and we still have low productivity, then we have to look at perhaps reassigning or restructuring the very nature of how work is done. I believe that there are some people who, because of how we have a workflow or a process structured, are just not able to reach the highest levels of their own productivity. I've seen it. I have definitely seen it in the public sector. I think that some of the work that is being done now on, Colin will help me with the language, job evaluation exercise. The job evaluation exercise, I believe, is the beginning of understanding how can we make certain roles more productive. People have a habit of saying that they're frustrated because they're not paid for their degree. A degree is only useful to the extent that you can apply it to the task that you are doing. So I dare say, I am not sure that we should be paying for degrees as much as we should be paying for productivity. If you have a degree and you are able to apply it well,
to the task that you're doing, then I will pay you for the fact that I see a brilliant application of these skills to the task that you're doing. But I think that it's not so much about the sector. I definitely think the public sector has significant productivity gains to be made, including in areas like infrastructure, education, and so on. But it is not that people are not performing. It is that we have, in some cases, we have structured work. We've allocated inputs in a way that does not work for the best performance of people. We have people who we know can perform at a higher level in a different role or with a different structure of work. I will tell you that some of the ways that we work now, it is downright colonial. Some of the ways that we carry out tasks, I mean, the youngest in the room will tell you that they make no sense, right? And that you're no longer the youngest in the room, I don't get to break it to you. And that if we really went back to first principles about understanding why we are doing something, right? Trying to make it the most efficient so that people can perform at their best levels, that we would do better. Let me say quickly though, because I know that this is what you're really getting at. I mean, I think that there's so much that technology can do, especially in the public sector. Right now, I don't think we're doing even 10% of what we can achieve with the right mix of people and technology. Because we've had efforts where we threw technology at something, and right now we're in a position where we got to do it all over again. I'm not going to say what that is. But the private sector, I think, has a lot more flexibility to engineer their own practices. Less flexibility, I would say, than perhaps the public sector does. It is like steering a very large ship, I feel, for the public sector. And let me say to you in closing that I think that this requires a dedicated effort, right? I think that we have to put productivity at the center. We know that we're doing something right if we see increasing the productivity. If we don't, we're not doing it right. And that has to be the metric.